Hey y'all, it's Sarah. I have another Christmas project today, and this one is going to be trying to use up some of the Dollar Tree wooden ornament pieces that I had to have. I'm going to be using these two in particular. This is kind of this polka dot looking tree, and of course the little truck. I'm going to be using some black chalk paint and some of these Dollar Tree letters. There's 26 letters in a package, so one full alphabet. And I'm not sure how many alphabets I ended up needing to use. You'd kind of have to do the math. I had a bunch of them that I already poured in a Ziploc bag, so I don't know how many were actually in there to do this particular one. So that's what we're going to be using. We're also going to be using essentially 2 full sheets of the Readi-board foam core. If you don't know what this is that foam centered kind of poster board stuff that you find in your office supply, school supply section of Dollar Tree, Walmart, Dollar General, those kind of places. So I've got 2 sheets. You can see one is cut down into 6 3-inch strips. I've also gone ahead and cut down my framing strips. So I've got 2 1-inch strips that are 30 inches in length and 2 that are 20 inches in length. And the painting tutorial for those on how to get that wood look is independent. Hop over to the paint tutorials, figure out which color wood you might like, what color frame you might like, and go from there. And let's go ahead and get started. So I didn't cut anything down on this because I want to lay my letters down first and kind of see how far they span. I kind of have an idea. I think it's going to be roughly about 20 inches wide when it's all said and done. But I'm not entirely sure. We're going to be cutting it down. That way you can kind of adjust it as you want your letters to fit. So my first step was to prep my letters. So I've already got them painted just to save time because I did not want to risk them not being completely dry. But I want to show you something that I did do. So I'm going to pop a couple of letters here and let you just kind of look at those and bring in kind of my bag of unaltered ones. And I want you to kind of notice here, the Dollar Tree version of these is a little more rounded off, and I'm not sure that you guys can see that super well. They have a little bit of a rounder shape, which is fine in itself, but I honestly wanted a more formal looking kind of Roman font, and I guess everything's not entirely dry here. So all I did was I came in with one of the Dollar Tree nail files. And this one, this Diamond Cosmetics one, is a perfect size because I want to show you. It ended up fitting in these letters really, really well. So essentially all I did was come in where that curvature was of each of these end pieces. I slightly sanded that curve off, so I had a much straighter letter to give me kind of a more formal font rather than that more rounded, playful font. That's really a personal choice, but I wanted to show you that they could be altered really easily. And you can see I ended up with a really nice looking formal font. So let me move those out of the way. Blow all that sanding dust off of here. So all I've got laid out here is I've got a bunch of plain white strips, and that's going to be my background. You could do it any which way, and if you wanted to paint them, I wanted to show you an idea. If you just wanted just a hint of color, one suggestion would be to come in with your antique in a really decent chippy style brush, and I used one of the really fluffy ones this time rather than the really wiry one because I didn't want a lot of streaking on this. I just wanted to shade it out a little. So all I did was barely add any antique to the end of my brush and just come across right at those seams. I never even touched the center portion, even though now it's kind of got you believing that the whole thing is kind of that ivory color. All I did was line up my strips just like this and hit down the center of each little section. And I wanted to show that option for anybody that might want to do that. And I'll show you really quick all that I did to make sure that I did not overdo this. Is I've got my Waverly Wax and Antique. And this is what you would be looking for. I took another sponge, a different brush, just one of the little Dollar Tree sponges, and I used that kind of as my applicator to brush barely across this brush so that I did not get it oversaturated. And then I still tapped it off a little bit, and I just came in right at those seams and shaded that across. So this brush added a nice little shadow between those pieces, a little bit of coloring, just a hair of kind of grain-like streaking, not as heavy as what you would get with some of the other chippy brushes. And it gave me a nice creamy looking base for this sign. And either which way you could do it, I like it as the solid white, but I also wanted to show this option. And to keep from blinding you guys, I'm going to maybe leave it at this one. We'll see how my letters look on here. So I have, you can kind of see, have a multitude of letters. I want to dry run these and see where they line up. One of the things that I do want to show is that when I get ready to lay my piece, these are 3 inches. There's 6 of them, which means it only comes up to 18 inches. There's going to be some excess that we will cut off here, but the reason that I left it that way and didn't just go ahead and say cut it at 18 inches was because I wanted to space mine out a little bit and have an actual gap between them before I glued them down, and to kind of give that dimensional illusion a little more. And that's part of why I'm going to go ahead and dry fit my letters to see where they're going to line up, because if I go ahead and glue this down now, when I get ready to trim this out on the sides, it would be 2 layers that I was trying to cut through at one time. And while that is possible, it is a struggle, especially cutting through the hot glue part. So we're going to dry fit this first and mark it out, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to kind of halfway do a little spacing there. So mine say Farm Fresh Christmas Tree. So let's see if we can get this all lined out here. Okay, so I have my letters laid out, and I wanted to show you a couple options, if I possibly can, to give you some ideas how to really customize this and make this sign kind of your own. I'm going to slide it down a little bit so I can maneuver these letters. So this is a very basic layout. There's a few other things that I wanted to show you that you could always add into this. So here is a popsicle stick, or a coffee stirring stick. They come in a big package like this. These came from Walmart, and I can't remember how much they were, but they were like less than $3. So I really like these because they're much longer than a popsicle stick, and they're a lot skinnier. I wanted to show you a couple other options that you could use. There are lots of little wood pieces inside of this Dollar Tree 3-in-1 board game. So you can always come in with like the little black round pieces, add those little details. And any of these work out. Play with your letters. I'm going to play with mine and decide which way I want my sign to lay out. And I am likely wanting to kind of go this direction, which is a little harder to eyeball when you're doing an arch. And if you've got like a big pizza pan or something that you can use to kind of follow that little bit of an arch direction, that may help you. I'm going to try to do my best to just eyeball it and see how well that goes. I'm a little over this way, so the good thing about using the strips like this as my backer piece, it kind of allows me a good way to get some alignment, kind of like having paper with lines in it. So I'm slightly off there still, but you can kind of see how this is going. The other thing that I wanted to go ahead and bring in is my little trees. So one of the things that I wanted to show you, just as a cheap tip, as you're playing with these and moving your letters around, if you take just a scrap of foam core, even your ruler can do this, but the thickness of this kind of helps. Once you get your letters laid down, you can just slide them around with this, and it makes it a whole lot easier for you to sit and play and manipulate these instead of moving every single one individually until you get your design. But I did want to kind of share that little tip instead of having to pick every single one up. So this is likely where I'm going to go with mine. I pretty much like this layout. I do want to end up spacing it out a little better, maybe, because I wanted to show or throw out one more idea. And I'm likely to do this one on mine. These are just some Dollar Tree Crafter Square rub-ons. This is kind of that really straight line font you guys recognize. You can see mine is marked out. I wanted to make sure that I could do the words that I wanted to do, and I'm going to end up adding fir, cedar, pine, spruce, some of those words along the bottom of my sign here, just to add a little more wording and detail. But this is pretty much where I'm going to go with this. Before I start gluing everything down, I do kind of want to size out how wide I want my sign. So just looking at this, I could leave it the full width and have all that white space around if I wanted to. I could most certainly come a little closer and box this in further. That's kind of a personal choice and a personal preference, and has a lot to do with the space that you're trying to fit this to. So I wanted to show that. I may trim mine down just a little. I do like the white space around it, but I don't know that I need that much white space. We'll see. But I want to go ahead and start getting some things glued down. I think this is pretty much where I'm going to kind of base my design off of and go from there. But I did want to show you that you could absolutely tinker with your design. You don't even have to have the trees here. You could just do it this way and have your truck in the middle, which is still really cute. And I did a lot of playing and did some screenshots, and I'll be sure to try to put those in a collage to give you a few more ideas. They're nothing formal, and I didn't glue any of it down. It was just me playing around to give some ideas. And I'm going to go ahead and start gluing some of this down. Got a little smudge down here. Hopefully, I will be able to hide that with some of my strips here for my framing. And in order to glue this down, guys, I pretty much stick with Dollar Tree hot glue. You can use any hot glue. But the reason I prefer hot glue is it has a low moisture content, and it dries very quickly. So you don't have a lot of wetness sitting on this surface, because the more moisture that soaks through that paper, the more likely it is for this piece to come apart on you. And by that, I mean, these things are made with two very, very thin sheets of paper. And I'm trying to find a little scrap close enough by that I can pull apart and show you. So all this is made of is, honest to goodness, a piece of paper. And you can see that that thing is so thin, you can see the paint on the back side. And that's all that's on both sides, is two really thin layers glued down to just some foam. So what can happen is any moisture product that you use, whether it's paint, whether it's glue. You know, if you're trying with Mod Podge and it's causing problems, this is why. It soaks through this paper surface. It hits that glue that had it glued down to that foam, re-wets that glue that they used, and causes this to just lift and peel right off. So that's part of the reason why I use hot glue. I know there's been some questioning on the Facebook group about adhesives and people having problems with peeling and that kind of thing. It really boils down to moisture content. You are dealing with, as much as it can look like wood and we can make it have that appearance, it definitely does not have the strength of wood, doesn't have the durability. There are some limitations to what it can and can't do. So keep in mind that any moisture that you're adding to this risk causing that surface to detach on you, and all your paint and work pretty much just kind of pulls apart. Now, I don't think anybody wants that happening. So you can see I'm kind of putting little gaps there. Nothing major, but enough to have a nice little spacing. And I'm just going to probably, maybe, we'll see, go with the full length of this. I do like going on a big scale. That may be the Southerner in me. We tend to believe go big or go home. So as much as I think that I don't want the extra size, I still might be tempted to lean that way anyway. So I love that adding this little bit of gap, that's part of why I'm attaching it to a backer piece, is to be able to add that gap. And that's why I tell you to be mindful about what color backer that you're using, because sometimes, depending on how you space your things out, it can definitely show through. On this one, it works for us. The back's white. My pieces are essentially white. And I'm just going to spin this around so I can reach it a little better. Oops. So I am just loading this last one with my hot glue. I will tell you, there are glues that I absolutely just don't recommend to use on this. More are your caustic glues, things like E6000. I really don't recommend, because sometimes you can get it to work. As long as it's a light amount of it and it doesn't get a chance to soak through this paper surface. However, if it does soak through this paper surface, it interacts with that foam at a chemical level. And one of these days, I'm going to play chemistry on here and show you guys, and kind of deconstruct one and do that and show you what I mean, that it can start to chemically react with that foam. And the really bad thing is that you may not notice it until like the next day or so, after it has that chance to seep through and those chemicals finally hit that foam. You may not notice it until a day or two later, and you think you have a good finished product. And it all comes down to, all of a sudden, it starts caving in and getting ripply, and then you start getting confusion of how did that happen. So those caustic, really high chemical glues can interact with foam the same way that spray paint does. So I'm just going to come in, now that I've got this spacing out, and I'm really glad that I didn't just cut it at 18 inches, because this is obviously way less than a 2-inch piece here at the end. Okay, so I've got everything laid out and ready to cut. And I'm just going to take my blade, use it to push my ruler here up against this edge really flush. I want to start up above. And for those of you that are still having a struggle, I'm using a cutting mat under here just because it's what'll fit on my desk surface in here. But if I'm sitting and cutting a lot of this, my actual preference, rather than having a nice cutting mat underneath me, is to have a sheet of cardboard, like break down a box and fold it out and use it as my cutting surface. I find it honestly way easier to control my blade Part of the thing with these mats is they're self-healing, which means there's some drag when your blade goes through that. And you feel that little bit of pull, and it makes it just a little bit harder to maneuver. So the cardboard box trick underneath it for me really helps out. I know some of you guys have said that the cutting part is the hardest part of this, and there's little tips and tricks. These right here, these little Dollar Tree finger guards, they make a big difference for me feeling like I have good control of my blade. Alrighty, so I do think, the more I'm thinking about this, I do think I'm going to take a couple of inches off mine. It's going to be a little harder for me to cut through, but I'm going to do it from the back side here. And I think I'm just going to take 3 inches off of mine. And I'm just going to pop through here, mark that out, and go ahead and start cutting that. I'm going to get my blade back out. And let me get started on this part. Okay, so you guys are going to watch me struggle. I'm going through 2 layers. One of the things that's going to help me is I've got this extra long ruler out right now. And I've got some of the Dollar Tree poster putty stuck to this so that I don't have a lot of slide as I'm going across this. And here is one of the biggest things I can tell you. Anytime you go to cut into this, don't start right there. You don't necessarily get enough pressure right at the beginning, and so your first starts of your cuts don't end up clean, and it starts it off dragging, and you get those edges that are kind of scuffed up when you're all said and done. Do your best to try to start somewhere above, get a lot of pressure on that blade, and then pull it through. And mind you, I am going through 2 layers of this right now. And let's see. I'm going to go through it one more time. Just hopefully. Nope. I have to go through it one more again. I think the hardest part here is that I can feel where it's catching my hot glue. There we go. So, still not terribly bad. That wasn't awful. I know some of you guys are struggling to get through the one piece, but if you kind of follow those few tricks, and I know they sound really simple, like they shouldn't make a big deal, but honestly, starting your cut well above you actually hitting your board is a big one. It starts, you can see how clean that started off for me, and it was much easier to maintain the proper pressure. Using the little dots to help keep your ruler stuck in place. All of those little things sound like little things, but they do really contribute to helping me get the cuts that I want out of this. So, I did that. I took my little 3 inches off. I'm just going to come in and frame this thing. And for those of you that are questioning how to miter something, in order to miter anything, get your framing mitered, you want to, and there's a video for framing, finishing, and all of those concepts. Your frame pieces, to start out, you want them the exact length of each one of your edges. So for this one, we are now at, I'm guessing 27 inches. Since I cut 3 inches off, we should be at about 27 inches. So I want 2 of these strips now at 27 inches, and this other set should be somewhere around 18.5 maybe now with our little spaces in there. So we're going to go ahead and cut those down. Okay, so hopefully you can see what I was talking about. These are now the very exact length of each one of their sides. This is the full length of the long side. These are the full length of the short side. And to get that miter, I'm going to show you really quickly. It's pretty simple. So my little strips that I'm using are 1 inch wide. I want to come over 1 inch. So right here, I'm just going to mark. And that basically gives me a perfect square. On the diagonal of that perfect square, when you go in half, it gives you a 45-degree angle. Now, in order to do your other side, you want to keep your long length on one edge and your shorter lengths on the other. So I want to keep that in mind when I go to mark this other edge. I've got my 1-inch square. My longest point is at this top corner, so I'm going to make sure that when I cut at this top corner. And actually now it's the bottom corner because I'm right-hand dominant. It's easier for me to turn this way and get it lined up. There we go. This one's really one, when you're trying to get these little tiny triangle ends and get those really straight and neat to measure up, this is really one where I suggest start up above before slicing through. And there you go. You have a full mitered strip. You're going to do the very same thing to every single piece, keeping these long points on the one side, the shorter section on the other side. You're going to make sure that you paint out all of your edges, all of your raw edges before we glue this down. Okay guys, all my edges are mitered. I've got a bunch of little triangles left. I don't throw these away, and you guys are going to see a Christmas craft come up with a lot of those spare triangles. So if you're cutting any of those for your mitered edges, keep them around. I've got something coming up with that. I'm just going to start gluing these in place. I'm just going to start on this longer edge first, just because it's closest to me. I do tend to go all the way around though, rather than go opposites, because then it's a lot harder. If these two were glued in place, there is no adjustment point for me right here if I did not have those glued in place. So I'm just gluing from tip to tip. You want to make sure that there's a pretty good adhesion on these edge pieces. You don't want them flopping around for sure. And the better that they're glued down, the less movement that they're likely to make, and the less likely they are to peel up on you. So get them glued pretty nicely right there to help protect those edges. Okay guys, I want to show you what happened to me and see if I can show you a way to try to fix it. So you can see I went to do my edges and paint those out, and I made a mess of my paint and dribbled it across my page. So the first thing I did, rather than toss this whole thing, the first thing I did was come in and cleaned as much of it with a dry cloth off as I could. I'm going to come in here with my Waverly chalk, and I'm going to do this with this sponge because it almost gives, this is just a Dollar Tree makeup wedge sponge. But the reason that we use these sponges is they give kind of an airbrush soft look, and we're going to try to use that kind of like white out here. So I'm going to get a little paint on here. I'm going to tap it off. It may be a little harder with this piece, considering that I did it quite large. This is usually my fix for, you know, a fingerprint here or there. I'm going to go ahead and let this set. Let it try to soak over and dry. Almost that papery, chalky finish over that. I will come back in with my little brush the same way that I brush these out. I may have to do this another time. But I did want to take this opportunity, rather than just hide it and keep going and not tell you guys. I thought it would be better to show you how to try to correct that if you end up doing that. Because this is not my first time doing that. Most of the time, though, it's usually fingerprints that I'm trying to get off of a white piece. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to let this dry. It's got a good majority of that covered. I'm going to let it dry, do one more layer, and then I will brush back over this the same way we did the original piece, and we should be back to fresh. Okay guys, it's had a chance to dry, and I went back over it with my brush, and it's like it never even happened. I could have left that out, but I really felt like I'm surely not the only one that has had a paint transfer accident, incident, fingerprint, something like that. And that's a really quick, easy way to try to fix it. I don't recommend necessarily doing that with just a paintbrush, just because it leaves brush strokes behind. And it may lay your paint a little heavier and cause some lifting, because I did not add any wax to that, but I used such a thin layer because of that sponge. So the last thing that we have left to do is to come in and start adding our letters and getting those glued down. For me, I'm going to be using something called art glitter glue, and this is a very it's a very fast drying glue. So where I don't typically recommend wet glues, this is one that I will use simply because it is fast drying. It doesn't have a chance to soak through and cause any lifting of my paper surface. This is something that you can order online. I don't know that any stores carry it. You can test out other glues. It's hit or miss. It very much is hit or miss. This is a fragile material. You know, there's plenty of you guys that have already had it fail on you once or twice. So just keep that in mind. This is the one that I happen to use. Stick glue works really well for this because it's not a high moisture glue. Your hot glue, and for some of my larger pieces, I likely will just use my hot glue, but for the letters, it's a little harder for me to control it without pulling out my fine tip glue gun and trying to use it. So all I'm going to do now is start gluing down some pieces. Okie dokie, guys, I've got everything glued down. I decided not to add any lettering down at the bottom of mine. I was actually planning on putting fir, pine, and spruce, or fir, pine, and cedar, which you can get all three of those choices. You can get fir, pine, and cedar, or fir, pine, and spruce out of just one of these packages. But after I got this done, I kind of really liked just the plain simplicity of it. You could always go further in and add the extra details, put in, you know, establish, cut and carry, those kind of things. But I'm going to leave mine pretty simple so that it'll blend in with the other signs that I've made without getting too busy. But this is pretty much the finished piece. Mine has ended up at about 26 by, I'm going to say probably about 18 and a half. And I was pretty spot on. It's 18 and a half by, yeah, it would be 26. So that's what my final piece ended up with. You can always scale this down, scale it bigger. But it was just something I wanted to throw out there. It's more uses for these wooden pieces that I personally just had to have. Now I'm trying to figure out how to use them all. So I hope that gave you some ideas, some how-tos or not to how-to. And I hope you get a chance to craft this week. Talk to you soon.